Glad to have you here. First question, I guess, how did you get started in Atlassian? What brought you into the Atlassian world?
Well, so I was working at a company, and I was mainly in their IT operations department, and they had this huge B2B client coming in, and as a result, I would see them making a lot of changes to their Jira instance. Initially, it was just Jira software that they were using, for software delivery. Um, with a B2B client coming in, all of a sudden they needed a service desk and they needed an ITSM solution, and so they hired a guy who would configure things up, and it sort of grabbed my interest because it was a very interesting thing to see. Because for me, Jira was always like simple ticketing tool, and I got to see, it's not only that, you have your incidents, you have your problems, you have your change requests, essentially anything that you can imagine within IT operations, it can get handled on just one platform. So that's where I started getting in. And the next thing that I would see was certain things getting done on their own. So I asked him, and he told me that Jira has some really strong automation functionality as well. So that's where, I just Googled Jira, and I saw that you can actually have a free instance of your own if you have a limited number of users. So I immediately got into that and started essentially copying whatever they would do on whatever the guy would do on the company's instance. I would sort of try and replicate this on my own, and that's how it started. Playing around with Jira configs and all.
Yeah, kind of probably very similar to a lot of other people who are in the Jira world, and myself included. I started out working with Jira as ticketing software and slowly kind of understood like, oh, cool, it's for development teams. And then there's Jira Work Management. Oh, interesting. Like, what does that do? And then there are other tools like Confluence and Opsgenie, which were really cool to integrate with as well. What is, I guess, the things that hooked your interest initially with Atlassian within that company or the way that they implemented? What were some of the key highlighting features that you were like, wow, that's really cool that Jira can do that?
So the first thing is it's you just mentioned Opsgenie, right? So around that time, I was already quite acquainted with Opsgenie. Been working around with Opsgenie for about 2 years at that time. So it was like this, the whole system was automated in such a beautiful way that there was this our client, whenever they face an issue, all they had to do was just log the ticket uh, on the service on the front end portal, the customer portal that Jira Service Management offers, and everything would be automated. Setting up the priority, determining whether to escalate this as a service request or an incident, and then so that was point A till the very end of the workflow where the actual teams would get calls in the middle of the night via Opsgenie saying that, hey, we've got an incident. It was like uh, when I basically sort of got to know that we are having a B2B client coming in. Essentially, in my mind, it was something like that we are gonna have support agents looking at their emails, and someone is gonna drop them an email, and they're gonna manually go on to Opsgenie and create a ticket, and that's that. But with the way it was implemented, essentially, we did not see any sort of a man in the middle sort of an implementation. It was all automated and pretty much took care of everything. And we just had to do what we were doing, which is get into war rooms and resolve the actual issues. It was essentially, it was like partnering up with a very efficient teammate who would take care of a lot of things. And that's how I took GSM as it came off to me as a very powerful tool. And then there was a second aspect to it. Once we had that help desk set up for them, um, we added on some extra features, extra requests. For example, another workflow for change management. In fact, another project for change management, and that was the first project that I actually worked on. And the way it sort of revolutionized the way changes were happening earlier, being managed earlier, to how they were being done now. Similarly with release management as well, and there was I would say, a very primitive way of just filling up Excel or Google Sheets, and to get that automated, organized, optimized via Jira Service Management. It meant lesser failures because obviously, the change calendar could be managed in a more efficient way, lesser conflicts, and everything would be right there for us to visualize, view, just with a mere few clicks. ID operations was really made easy with JSM, if I were to summarize.
I really like how you made that analogy of Jira as kind of like partnering with a very powerful teammate that can kind of help you and push you to, forget less and to be more organized and have more incident response and change management. Um, I'm curious to see how you maybe implemented that in the past. I know that the typical way is maybe just around incidents or with just bigger, larger scale changes to infrastructure or maybe hardware that need to be documented or scheduled. What's been your experience with the change management side of Jira?
Well, first off, a big hassle used to be knowing, who's gonna approve what change. Uh, Change advisory board, who's gonna approve what change and whether they have done that. When will they be doing that? Who should be following up? So we are via automations and all of that got sorted out really easy. We just had to pick the service because Jira gives you the option to add components within the project itself, and that was really easy. No matter how many faces were getting changed within the company, you just have to configure it once, and it pretty much takes care on its own. So with that, there were no unnecessary delays or roadblocks when it came to approving and reviewing changes. Secondly, with Jira, it was really easy to classify what sort of change requests would go as standard or normal or emergency. And you can essentially base everything that Jira does based on the the change types. So that would mean that for an end user like me, if I'm just blocking, I just need to block a change request, fill in the details, submit the form, that's all. I don't need to worry about on a given date when I'm about to implement the change, whether it's approved, rejected, or not, because the notifications get sent out, the approvals, they either get rejected or approved in a very timely way. We have the change calendar as well. So for change managers or the advisory boards or whoever is actually involved in planning and deploying those changes, it's a very good and a very sort of a very helpful tool to view as well. View if there are any conflicts or anything. Other than that, the other thing that I saw was how you can, the way you can relate problems with incidents and similarly with changes as well. So, and not only that, with Confluence and with Opsgeni's built-in post-mortem feature as well, you can also have that the RCL linked, and all of these things in a real live ID world. Normally, everything is linked in one way or another. With Jira, it gives you the options and the capability to actually link all of these. And clicking one, you can see what incident led to what sort of a change, what problem led to what sort of an incident. So, from a service assurance point of view, knowing these things are really important. And then on top of that, building up reporting and analytics on these sort of things. For instance, I remember distinctly, I had this requirement that, we get 10 or 15 major incidents per month. It would be interesting to know that what's the correlation between releases and incidents. So with Jira, it's really helpful even if the components are getting matched between the incident and the releases that get logged in. Jira can pick them on their own as well, so nothing gets lost essentially in day-to-day operations with Jira. So that's what I found the most helpful
That's great.
within Kit.
What did your approval workflow look like? I know that I've implemented things like different change types with standard change, which is a pre-approved workflow. A normal change might have a change advisory board. An emergency change might have an ECAB or an emergency change advisory board. In some cases, there would be two levels of approvals. So you might have a change that goes through to an IT manager. Once that's approved, then it
Yes,
goes to a change advisory board. What kind of implementations have you seen in the past that might have worked best?
right. So first off, like, just to make it really easy for the customers, I've seen an implementation where no matter if it was a standard, normal, or an emergency change, the customer has to fill just one thing. It isn't necessarily different forms for each, and they just have to click an option if it's a standard or an emergency or a normal change. What happens is whenever that change is submitted, an automation kicks off, and there are various levels. For example, one of the implementations that I saw, it essentially the first approver had to be the service expert. So whatever service you enter into the form, the request is directly routed to the service matter expert, and that person has to be the first one. And it's essentially nothing but like it can be, for example, it can be a component lead as well. So it gets routed to them, and immediately as they approve, the automation kicks in again. New approvers are added in, or they are pre-added. This again depends on what sort of automation you're running. Emails get sent out as well. And the good thing is, Jira has those approver emails as well, right, where they request some action. You can even send out personalized emails as well if you want to maybe add some additional details within the email body itself. For example, if it's an emergency change request which came out of an incident, the email might have a sort of a link to the incident or something like that, a beam back as well. And another thing is, emergency changes require quicker actions, faster actions. Maybe they get needed to be done, maybe within a matter of minutes even. So another good thing to have, which luckily Jira can implement as well, is Slack integrations, because people normally are more proactive or more active on Slack than emails, and it's built that way as well to be sort of a real-time communication tool. Jira can get integrated with Slack as well, so you have that option if there is an expedited change request or an emergency change request. You can have messages just sent to Slack as well to specific people or specific channels. So the communication aspect to it is really refined here. Another thing about the first implementation that I did was basically picking approval groups on its own. So they were basically user groups, and that was based on the component that was involved in the change itself. So that's number one. Other than that, there were some pre-approved changes as well, like you mentioned. So we had that sort of a checkbox on it, and another check. I don't remember exactly what, but a couple of checks and the approvals would get skipped as well. So that was basically having another leg of the workflow itself. All in all, quite flexible. I think Yep. So that's more or less what I saw regarding change approvals.
Yeah, one thing you mentioned was the ease of use for the customer to submit a change request or just any request in general. I think that's so critical, especially today, because if you overcomplicate the way that a customer jumps into the portal and submits a request, they're just either going to, number one, try to email you or Slack message you rather than fill out the form, or number two, fill out the wrong form every time just to get the quickest submission possible. So I think having that form curated in a way where you still receive enough details from the customer without asking too many questions or making it overly complicated for them, I think that's kind of the sweet spot that you want to aim for. And I've seen kind of the I've seen an extreme on both sides where you have a portal with 50 different request types that you have to fill out forms for each different request type. And then I've seen some with one request type, and it's a very basic conditional form, basically an email at that point. So there's definitely that sweet spot that you want to aim for, and I'm sure each organization is going to be unique in its own way of what their customers are willing to fill out. If it's internal, they're probably going to be a little bit more willing to fill out more information. If it's something external, if it's a customer that is maybe utilizing a product that you have or a product that you're providing, you're probably going to want to simplify that a little bit more. And one way that I've really been able to achieve that is to use conditional logic, and
Mm-hmm.
to, in
Yeah.
some cases, even calculate certain fields with automation on the back end. So one thing we actually set up recently was the priority matrix. So depending on the urgency and the impact, we calculate a priority when the issue is submitted or when the customer submits a request. I've done that in the past with even the change management, like whether it's a normal change, a standard, emergency change. Depending on the selected fields, we could actually apply a different change type to that particular issue that gets submitted by the customer. And usually, change management isn't too difficult to add extra fields to because it's someone who's a little bit more experienced and who's a little bit more familiar with the product and already knows what change they need. So you could typically include more fields in a form like that. But the beauty of it is that you could run those automations on the back end and make it very, very easy for the customer to submit a request and then just auto identify, auto assign, auto prioritize all those requests that come in. So that's definitely something that we try to do at grid.io for our clients very often, as simple as possible for the customer, simple as possible for the agent to be able to submit the request, to be able to execute on the request and get it resolved.
Yeah, I think it's a really fair point. Essentially, whoever is figuring should aim for is whatever can get automated should get automated.
hmm Yeah, that's very true.
And yes, that does make a lot of sense, and rightly so. That's where the experts come in. Yeah.
Yep. I don't know if you've seen like Atlassian Rovo and what they're releasing with that product, but I think that'll be a pretty big game changer if they're developed in the right way.
Mhm.
You kind of mentioned that it's kind of like having a virtual teammate. This is kind of what they're aiming to do with the Rovo product. So I'd be really interested to see what their direction is with that once they release it.
Actually, haven't heard of that, but uh, it does sound interesting. If they are launching, a new product, and that too, what you mentioned should be big.
Yeah, pretty much, it's like they're pretty much adding a user to your
Isn't
Atlassian environment. So
all right.
you can have that user that you can interact with. You could send them a message, ask them to execute on a task, and
Okay, all
that
right.
Atlassian Rovo agent can pretty much execute on that task. It's
Mhm.
really cool and really interesting. So once they actually release it and we're able to use it, I'm really curious what the implementations that we can achieve with this product.
Yeah, sounds interesting. Looking forward to it.
Yeah. I have a couple of running questions that I've been asking most of my guests that I've brought onto the podcast, um, all Atlassian related, and feel free to speak your mind.
Sure.
No need to hold back on these. But we'll start with an easy one. What is the
Mhm.
most innovative way that you've seen an Atlassian tool being used in the past recent, maybe year or so?
Well, one of them was actually I mean, there are a lot of things, but one of those is I've actually seen Atlassian Jira Service Management to automate the whole procedure of escalating an incident on Slack. Well, actually, my experience is more towards ITSM, so my answers would be, sort of within that scope, because that's mostly what I've worked in. So apologies if someone was looking for a software perspective or something. So it's essentially what it meant, like basically there was a requirement that places I work with, they had, is that there should be a set template wherever there is an incident. It should have a priority, the impact, explanation, the description of the incident itself, the start time, the end time. Not only that, there should be a link to a war room, and there should be a link to a transcript document as well. So that was basically, coupling not one, not two, but 4 different platforms: a Google Meet link, a link for a link for an incident notes document, which was essentially that we created a conference page anytime we had an incident, and then sort of combining all of those together and then dropping them off at Slack. So similarly, there was another case where companies would, the incident managers would basically fill in Google Sheets and copy the form itself, the table itself, and paste it on the email body and send out incident updates. I think that was something that was accomplished by Jira itself as well, because all they had to do now was just comment on the Jira incident ticket, and actually, the whole form would get filled on its own. The template was exactly the same. I would say more beautiful, in fact, and get sent out to the same sender list that they were doing it manually. If you think big, essentially virtually anything can be automated where Jira, when it comes to day-to-day operations. I've seen a lot of things like this happen. Even some things that I don't know Jira wasn't meant to do. For instance, send out scheduled emails that are not at all related to Jira projects. But I've seen people do that as well. For example, there was one case where some of the company managers and leads, they needed to fill a document, a running document, in fact, that had sort of HR people related stuff within it. And it was by no means something that Jira had any concerns with, because the data coming in was not something from Jira itself, but rather than getting in another scheduler, email scheduler plugin, or any other solution, the same got implemented within Jira. Just a scheduled automation, the link to the document, and on the face of it, it really seems to be something really simple implementation wise. It was a really simple automation, but think about it. You are sending an automated email every month to just update some of the reporting requirements that are not at all related to Jira, but you're doing it via Jira. If you have that, if you have Jira as an option within your company, there are a lot of things like this you can do, which I don't think even Jira or Atlassian advertises you can be doing this. So I guess it's on us how innovative we can get, and Jira can help us, take it through with the implementation.
Yeah, I'm a big proponent of unifying your software stack for having less tools to do one thing, because if you're working in Jira, you're updating people in Slack, and then you have a checklist or to-do list in Microsoft To Do, and then you're sending emails through Outlook, and then you have all these apps that aren't really connected. So One thing I've noticed over the past couple of years of working with Jira has been that you could replace a lot of tools with the Atlassian suite. Confluence, Jira, a lot of tools can kind of be replaced with Atlassian, which is, the name of the podcast, kind of the inspiration behind it, Atlassian Everything. Because even the things that you may not think can work in Jira or work in Atlassian and with their products or suite of tools, you can probably build them out and make them work in some way, or somehow implement them, even if it wasn't really meant to exist in Jira, or that kind of a functionality didn't really wasn't intentionally implemented by the Atlassian team. So I
Exactly.
think that's been a really cool thing to see over time. And the more features they add, the more new features that they release over time. And I feel like the more tools we can replace, and hopefully they come out with like an email tool and like a Slack tool. That way you can just use Atlassian and nothing else. I think that's like the dream eventually, but for now we're just making do as we go. And obviously they have their own suite of tools that they're really good at developing. We can unify a lot of tools already, which has been really great.
Yeah, it is. It's funny you mentioned emails. I've actually heard, I've never seen it on my own. There are a lot of CRM functions as well that Jira does, like core
Mhm.
CRM functions.
Yep.
So it's really interesting and exciting to just see what Jira can do. And it's also one more thing that I really found helpful and really great about Jira, which isn't the case with every tool that's out there, is Jira has a very vibrant community as well. People posting all sort of stuff and innovative ideas that they have done with Jira, and there is so much that is out there with Jira itself and what people have been doing with it. So it's something that is, I would say, growing exponentially by the day.
Yeah, that's what I noticed too. Anytime you have a problem that you encounter,
Yeah,
if you search for a solution, someone else has had the same problem and has found an answer to it already. So the community is really great. The product is very mature. It's getting to a point where a lot of people are using the product, and I think the community that they built has been really great from that perspective, because again, any problem that I've had in the past, like 99% of issues that I've come across, someone has an answer for it already, which has been really nice to see.
exactly. Yeah, it's been really helpful.
Last question is, what is one thing you wish Atlassian would implement?
Oh, that's a tough one. One thing that Atlassian would implement, a lot of things, coming in. So when I was actually working on Opsgenie, I would notice quite some limitations as well. For example, the lack of war room options that we have, because for an incident management team, war rooms are the key, and there would be lesser integration options with some of the tools that are out there, for example, Google Meet and stuff like that. So that's one thing I would want them to implement. Um, well, it's hard to think of. You put me on the spot here,
Yeah,
but
I have a whole list that I come
yeah,
across all the time, and it's hard to kind of pinpoint one thing that you would wish would change overnight.
yeah. I think, and sorry, but the native reporting, could
Hmm.
improve a bit.
Yeah,
You
that's a
do
great point.
rely on the plugins, on the add-ons for a lot
Hmm.
of stuff. I don't know the reasoning behind it, but it would have been great if Jira itself natively could offer more options than
Hmm.
the few widgets that they have.
Yeah, I was at Team 24, and that is something they're improving. Based on what I saw so far, it's getting better. I wouldn't say it's at the level of, those third-party plugins like Easy Buy or Custom Charts. It's getting better, which is a good sign. But yeah, that's one thing that I ran into, and a lot of clients that we've worked with that run into, they're like, why can't we do this in reporting? Like, why is there so much limitations? And almost every time my answer is, hey, we pretty much have to use a third-party plugin to do that.
Yeah,
And that's just how it is in Jira as of right now. But hopefully that's something they continue to develop, and implement and create a robust enough feature set to where you don't need a custom
Yeah,
plugin for pretty much every client that we work with.
right. We surely will. So because it would help reduce a lot of costs, and having the
Yep.
plugin within Jira, it would get really easy, and obviously it's a much more stable option to have as well.
Yeah, that's very true. All right, Osama, I thank you for jumping on the podcast. It's been great to have you on, hear your perspective. We're looking forward to having you on at some point in the future again as well.
Thank you so much for having me, Josh. Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Yep.